Hi everyone, welcome to History on Trial. This is Dr. Tracey McCarthy. We are going to continue opening this can of worms related to Cuba. We are going to be looking at Cuba not only as the name of a country, but as a people. And by people, that means a people as in a European race of people based upon surname, and also an actual kingdom in Africa in the Congo. If this appears on anything other than Dr. Tracey McCarthy, it is stolen and unauthorized. Let's get started. And to do a little recap based upon our previous discussion related to Cuba as a country name, Cuba with the K is also a derivative of the Hebrew name Jacob. And when it's spelled according to the Polish variation, it's Jakub. And so we are going to look at this name Cuba again, its European branch and also its African branch. And we find that the block is hot for Cuba with a K in Europe, and it is coming out of Germany and Poland. And so you can see early origins of this name popping up in Europe, and you can see information related to it being related to the largest province in Poland. It's also noted that these individuals held vast estates, and many of them were elevated to the ranks of nobility. And here you see a branch of Cuba in Austria. And you can see that this is also an elevated family in terms of nobility. And down at the bottom, you can also see spelling variations of this family of Cuba, which includes the Cuba with the C-U-B-A. When you start looking at Cuba in Africa in terms of the people, you start to get the idea that perhaps the naming of the country of Cuba might not have been as random as it might appear at first glance. So see here you have Cuba with the K-U-B-A, and these individuals are identified as a Bantu speaking people in the central Congo River area. You also see that there is a location in Europe named Cuba with the same spelling. Here we have information from Encyclopedia Britannica indicating that the Cuba people are related to the former African kingdom known as the Cuba Kingdom, and it was in the interior of the DRC. One thing that is also noteworthy is this foundation around the 1600s. This is noteworthy because you see a number of kingdoms that were popping up around the same time based upon people migrating to these particular areas. The discussion of the Cuba goes on to indicate that the Cuba are also called the BaKUBA. Additional notations indicate that the Cuba are divided along lineages related to matrilineal descent, even though they have this name Cuba and they have this kingdom with the name Cuba. They are divided along their matrilineal lines. Some may be wondering, what does this all have to do with the country of Cuba with a C? Researcher Miguel Barnett indicated that many individuals who were enslaved in Africa were enslaved from this Congo region, and those individuals, a huge majority it's indicated, were actually transported to the country known as Cuba. This researcher also indicated that many elderly Cubans could still remember the names of the tribes and ethnic groups that their ancestors were captured from. And this was from that area in the Congo where you have the Cuba people. And here you have depictions of the Cuba people in Africa. And here you have royals and nobles of the Cuba people in Africa. And here you have additional depictions of the Cuba people in Africa. One thing that you might want to make note of is the significant brow ridge that is noted in terms of the phenotype for the people in Cuba. And as we wrap this up, we have two depictions of females in Cuba or from Cuba as in Cuba, Africa. And you might note that the phenotype of the two females, these phenotypes actually resemble very closely the phenotypes of individuals found on mainland America. What might be helpful would be having increased discussions and exploration and research on the relationships between the Cuba people of the country Cuba, also the Cuba people in Africa, and the Cuba families of Europe. It would be very interesting to find out a little bit more about the migrations of all three of those groups and the relationships of all three of those groups over time. This appears to be a very interesting diaspora dynamic. Remember, knowledge is power. Take care. See you soon.